This is Right from the Deep.
I'm Karen Ball.
And I'm Erin Taylor Young. And this is the podcast from writers for writers, answering the question,
why am I doing this?
Right. As writers, editors,
and a former literary agent,
we're in the deep with you,
encouraging you and equipping you to find your truest story in the deep places.
Get our show notes and more, including a free audio download on how to safeguard your writer's heart at rightfromthedeep.com.
Hello, friends, and here's what's happening at Right from the Deep.
First, thank you to all our patrons on Patreon. You guys, we love you. And you help make this podcast possible. And anyone out there who wants to add support, you can visit Patreon. That's patreon.com/rightfromthedeep.
A big thank you to our September sponsor of the month, Christy Bass Adams. She's the author of a devotional titled Learning as I Go, Big Lessons from Little People, and a middle grades novel, The Adventures of Cricket and Kyle, Imagination Checkers. She's also a speaker and leads women's conferences and Bible studies, and she's a monthly contributor to Inspire a Fire and a newspaper columnist for Green Publishing.
Thank you, Christy. And I am delighted to say that I will be at the Florida Christian Writers Conference. That's coming up, guys. And it's in Leesburg, Florida, October 16th through 20th. And there will be a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. I hope to see you guys there.
So it's my turn for the wonder. And I was just at a retreat with a group of writers. It's a retreat that I've gone to for 18 years or so every year. And even though we all know each other very well, we do have some differences in things like our political beliefs. Now,
dear.
as often happens in the church, Christians avoid dealing with any conflict that has to do with politics. However, again, because we have known each other for so long and we are so much a part of each other, a situation happened where, big surprise, I stuck my foot in it. And I could see that I had hurt one of the gals who attends this retreat. So I went to her and I apologized, but that wasn't enough. God just kept working on my heart because I was wondering, why can't we who share our belief in Christ, who are believers and children of the living God, why can't we talk about things like politics without it becoming so tense? So I used we each get time to have a workshop and a brainstorming session together. I used mine and we talked about Christians dealing with conflict, the biblical pattern for Christians dealing with conflict, but we bathed it in prayer. I mean, big time. We were praying all throughout it that God would be present. Did it get tense? Yes. But here's the thing. God showed up so much so that he brought out a hurt that I had caused this same person years ago, that she held inside her heart without even realizing she was doing it. He brought that all to the surface. And the minute she said the thing that she said that I had done to hurt her, I jumped up out of my chair and I grabbed her and I hugged her and I thanked her for letting me know, because I had known there was something there that was a barrier. And now God had come in and he had brought us to a place of vulnerability and honesty, and he set us free. I can't tell you how it felt when she hugged me so tight and I hugged her and we both started crying, because that spirit of dissension and division was gone. It had no place with those of us who were sharing honestly and asking God to bathe that time in his presence and his love and his unity. So if you have a situation that you're facing that you're worried about, or a conflict that you don't want to address, please go to the Father, pray about it. And if he wants you to address it, go in with great fear and trembling, but with the sure knowledge that God will show up. God is already there before you even start praying, and he will bring you victory in the face of what the enemy wanted to be defeat.
Yes, I love it. Amen. And now,
here's the show.
Welcome, listeners. We're so excited that you're here for another day, another show. And we have a guest, also exciting. Karen will introduce our guest.
Our guest is someone that you all know. She's been here before, and we're so excited that she's here with us now. And her name is Grace Fox. She's the writer who lives on a boat. She speaks at women's events internationally and inspires hope, courage, and transformation through God's word. She's written 14 books and published hundreds of articles in magazines. She's a member of the first 5 Bible study writing team for P31 Ministries and a co-host for the podcast, Your Daily Bible Verse. She is just so smart, you guys. And she's here to share with us about conferences and other things. Oh, and she has a new devotional that's out now that's called The Names of God, Living Unafraid. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Yes, we are excited about it. So let's start with our same lovely question that we love digging into this. So, Grace, what does the deep mean to you?
Well, that word reminds me of my childhood. So, standing on the diving board at the swimming pool, at the end of swimming classes, the teacher would say, "Okay, everybody, you get to jump off the diving board." And I would just die inside because the thought just scared me half to death. So, getting up those stairs and standing on the diving board with a lineup of people waiting patiently behind me, well, I worked up the courage to jump into the deep end. And that's what I think of, where even in my faith journey, it's scary sometimes when God calls me to a place where he says, "Okay, Grace, I want you to jump."
Mm.
And the good thing to know is that he's always there to catch me, like the lifeguard. In the goodness of his heart, he'd be down there with his arms up straight, going, "It's okay, Grace, you can jump. I'll catch you."
That's great.
Cool. So, what about now? It's conference season kind of starting up here in the fall. And I would love to hear, Grace, about your very first conference because we were talking a little bit earlier, and I know you got some good story about your first conference.
Yeah, so I started my writing career thinking I was going to develop a line of greeting cards. So I found a woman who could draw because I can't draw to save my life. I came up with the concepts and we put together 10 sample cards. So then we thought, now what do we do with them? And she really wasn't interested in doing any more than drawing. She had a little hobby farm she was busy with, and so I said, "Okay, I'll figure out the marketing. I haven't got a clue, but I'll figure it out." I remember sitting down at my computer and Googling, like for the first time, Christian greeting card publisher. And up came the Florida Christian Writers Conference. I didn't even know that such a thing existed. So I thought, wow, that looks interesting. And I scrolled through it. I looked to see the faculty members that were going to be there. And lo and behold, Dayspring was going to be there. Wow. So
Hmm.
my first thought was, that looks so good. I should go. Oh, but that's way beyond my reach. That's so far. I can't do this. I can't afford it. And, came up with all the reasons why not. That was in August.
Where were you living at the time that it was far?
I was living on a little island off the coast of British Columbia, working at a Christian camp, and we weren't living on paid support. So the thought of coming up with the money to do this was just beyond me. And then the thought of getting there was another issue. But
Wait a minute. So that really was far. I mean, so let's just like point this out for our listeners. You were far, okay? And you were financially challenged. Those were both true.
true. Yeah. And as far as distance goes, it would take me 2 ferries just to get to the mainland. And then I would have
Mm.
to fly from either Vancouver or Seattle. So if I were to go to Seattle to fly, it would be about a 12-hour trip, 10 or 12 hours with 2 ferries. So
Wow.
it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. So I remember thinking, arguing about that, and then just kind of shutting it down and thinking that's impossible. But the thought never really left the back of my mind. And in October, I went back in, I looked at the site again, and it was like somebody just gripped me and said, "You need to be there." And I shared
Wow.
that with my husband, and he just said, if God is wanting you to go, then I will support you with that. We will make it work.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So God actually, he did make it work in an amazing way, because a couple of weeks later, I went to a teeny tiny missions conference at a teeny tiny church, literally walked across the cow pasture to get there. And it was on a Friday evening. At the pastor opened the service by saying, "Everybody stand up, turn around, say hi to somebody around you." So I did that, and lo and behold, the woman behind me was there because her husband was one of the speakers for that weekend. But I graduated from Bible college with her more than 20 years before, and I hadn't seen her since. I'd had no contact with her. So I went, "Lynn, so great to see you. And what have you been doing with yourself?" She told me that she was a travel agent working out of her own home now. And I remember saying, "Hey, give me your information because I will keep you in mind if I ever need to go somewhere." And so when it just seemed like God was saying, "You're going to Florida," I phoned her up and I said, "Lynn, here's the deal. I need to get to Florida on this day and I need to get back on this day. And I need you to get me there as inexpensively as possible. So out of Vancouver or out of Seattle." She said, "Let me see what I can do." And she called me back. She said, "Grace, I had never seen anything like this before, ever. So give me your credit card like right now." So I did. And she booked me a flight on the days that I needed it. It was about $150 round trip. So
No.
that was a miracle. And let me tell you, she told me years later, I didn't know the end of the story until I met her at a women's retreat years later. And she goes, "Grace, by the way, did I ever tell you what happened after I booked your ticket?" She said, a disclaimer came up on the screen that said, "That price is a mistake. We will honor every ticket purchased on that price, but that was a mistake." And
That's
that's how
God.
I got to my first writers conference.
That is amazing. Like, look at how God provided. You stepped forward in faith each time, and God gave you that encouragement along the way and that prompting and then he made it work
Well, he
miraculously.
he did more even because we had a house that had been on the market for 2 years in
Mm.
Washington State. When we moved to Canada, we put our house on the market, and it sold just before Christmas that year. But I was still several $100s shy of what I needed to go. So about a week before the conference, I remember sitting at the kitchen table, literally crying because I felt like this is way bigger than me. I just know I feel like I'm on a white water rapid rafting trip and I'm hanging on for dear life, but this is way bigger than me. But into our mailbox came a letter from escrow that said they made a mistake in figuring out how much they owed us after the house sold. And the amount of money they owed us was almost to the penny what I needed to finish what I needed to get to Florida.
Don't you
So
love
I,
how God does that? I mean, that's amazing. I
Wow.
guess it's pretty clear God wanted you there.
and I think that's another reason why I cried because I thought, he's in charge of this and this is bigger than me. So let's just hang on for dear life and see where this goes. I went because I knew I was supposed to go.
Yes, it's very
So, how did
clear.
that conference go for you?
My greeting cards were nicely rejected by by the Dayspring editor, and they've never gone anywhere to this day. So that would have been like 1999,
Wow.
and they've never gone anywhere. But it was like I say, the carrot before the little donkey's nose. That I just followed that carrot, and it led me to the Florida Christian Writers Conference. So while I was there, I went to every workshop I could possibly go to because I wanted to get my money's worth out of this thing.
Yeah.
And I went to the ones, especially about writing for magazine articles. And that was where I broke into writing, was just doing what the editors said. I
Mm,
played by the rules and
mm,
I got the Christian Writer's Market Guide and I studied it like a Bible and I did all the right things and I was able to break in.
mm.
But that doesn't mean that I did it all right.
So first though, let's go back to that you got rejected by Dayspring. Like, what happened to you when that happened? Did you obviously you said, "Well, too bad. I'm still going to learn everything." But did you also go, "God, did you make a mistake?" Like, what did you think when that happened?
Okay. So I got rejected there, but I thought, no, I'm not going to give up that easy. So I think I went back home And I sent the samples to, um, I must have sent them in to Dayspring. At that point, there was an artist named Matt Anderson, and he had a line of greeting cards called Heaven's Unofficial Greetings, little hugs. Like
Hmm.
they were little characters like Ziggy, the little
Yeah.
cartoon
Yeah.
character. And they were one of my favorite lines of cards. And so I sent some samples in, and he, I got a letter back. It was a letter that said, kind of a form rejection. Your cards do not meet what we're looking for at this time. Thanks, but no thanks. And I saw the name on this letter when I got it, and I thought, that's not Matt Anderson. That's who I wanted to look at the cards. So I got on the phone. There was a phone number on that thing. I phoned and I asked for that person, and it was a name that could be either a male or a female name.
Mhm.
So I really didn't even know who I was calling. But I called up. It turned out to be a man, and I said, I want to know why these cards are rejected. And so he said, well, to tell you the truth, I didn't even see them.
Mm.
I was not the one who looked at them. Matt Anderson did. And so why don't I have him call you? He's a really nice guy, and he will do that. And I thought, yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't call us. We'll call you. But I thanked him and hung up. 30 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was Matt Anderson himself.
Wow.
And he went through each card and what he thought about them, gave me his opinion. And then he said this. He said, Grace, if God is in this, then don't stop until he says so.
Hmm.
Very good.
Hmm.
I thought that was the best piece of advice. And I've passed that on to a lot of newer writers too, because it really kept me going. And I didn't realize you probably shouldn't get on the phone and call and say, tell me, explain to me. But these people were gracious with me and gave me the answers I was looking for, and that's what I needed. And Matt Anderson, later I was able to interview him for a Power for Living Sunday School paper article, and then we met years later at a Mount Hermon Christian Writers Conference. It was great fun.
Wow. What I love is these connections that you were building. So let's go back to the conference. So you get rejected by Dayspring, but you're still moving along. Did you get rejected at the conference with Dayspring, or did that happen later?
No, that happened right at the
Okay,
conference.
yeah.
I had sent them in earlier
Okay.
to be looked at. And so when I got the envelope back, there was the nice rejection letter.
And how did you
And so
feel?
I was disappointed because that's why I went. I went thinking, oh, these are so cute, and for sure somebody's going to want them. And I had actually kind of done a little bit of a test drive with some Christian bookstores on Vancouver Island.
Mm.
I had taken them in, and to a friend of mine who owned a Christian bookstore in Tacoma, Washington.
Hmm.
And all of them were favorable reviews.
Wow.
And so I went to that conference thinking, I've got this thing in the bag. But it didn't turn out that way at all.
You wouldn't be the first person to think, I've got this thing in the bag
Not by a long shot.
at a conference. So what else happened at the conference? You learned a lot, it sounds like.
I learned a ton. And really, that was the best thing I ever could have done, was to invest in a conference. I know it's costly, but it's an investment. People invest in their education if they're going to become a teacher or a dentist or any other career. So we need to, as writers, invest as well, and know that that money is well spent. And so
Right.
I went wanting to learn. Especially when I got my rejection, I knew that I had to pivot. That's the big word, right? To pivot and to be flexible. And I thought, okay, well, if the cards aren't going to fly, I'm not going to waste this. So what else can I learn? And yeah, I did that. I remember catching an editor on the sidewalk and pitching an idea on the way to the dining room and that type of thing. And he actually said to me, yeah, go ahead. Why don't you write up the story? And I did, and I got published. So that was a win for me.
You know what I love about all this is that you're very tenacious. You were willing to not roll over and die at the first sign of trouble. You know, you just kept moving forward. Now, I know you and I were talking at one point about your interaction with what it was, Andy Shearer, I think it was. Was that a result of this conference?
Yes, yes. And Andy had said yes to an idea that I pitched to him as well. So I went home, wrote up the article, typed it up, and I sent it in. That was in the days of, they weren't doing so much by email then. It was the hard copy. So I sent it in, and a little while later, I got a rejection letter back on it. But I was appalled to see that when I sent this thing in, I sent it on recycled paper. So there was something typed on the back.
Oh,
It wasn't even clean paper that I sent the article in on. I was so appalled. I just wanted to go crawl into a hole and never come back out. But I did get their form rejection letter back. I think it did say something like, try again. It wasn't don't ever do this again. I did get a comment like that from another editor. I can tell you about that one.
yeah.
But this one, I don't think I ever submitted again to decision. But because I was so embarrassed, just so embarrassed.
So let that be a lesson to everyone out there. Try to use clean paper. Or in these days, hey, everything's electronic, so that helps. But don't send it to whom it may concern.
That's right. Play by the rules. Get that Christian writer's market guide and play by the rules.
There you go. There you go. So obviously, though, you've had a very prolific career. Did you go to other conferences, or did you just make the most of this one so much that you were developing connections as you were submitting and getting rejections and submitting again?
I probably went to 1 or 2 conferences a year for the first 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh,
Wow.
I did the whole thing. I prepared meals for my family, and I marked on the freezer container, 350 degrees for 45 minutes. I did all of that, just prepared, so that my family wouldn't feel like I was stepping out on them,
Mm.
because I'd be gone for a week at a time. So I still had 3 kids at home at the time.
Yeah.
They weren't little anymore. They were junior high and high school, but still. So I did that, and then I think I took a bit of a break, if I remember correctly, just because I felt like things were really starting to move along, and it was okay to take a break for a bit. So a couple of years, 3 years, and then my husband and I moved from the island down to Abbotsford, British Columbia, which is about an hour from Vancouver.
Mm.
But the ministry that we began leading at that time meant that I had to be overseas for about 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks every summer, and also in the spring. And I had loved going to Mount Hermon, partly because it wasn't as far as the Florida Christian Writers Conference. It wasn't clear across the continent for me, and
Right.
it was in the same time zone, so I didn't have to deal with jet lag. So that was quite handy, just less expensive all around for me. But they always did it in the springtime, right around Palm Sunday. And that's when our missions staff conference was held overseas. So I missed it for many years there as well. And yeah, my writing career was really taking off at that point. So it didn't hurt it so much because I had a lot of established connections.
Right.
But for those who are thinking about it, or just fairly new kids on the block with this, it is good to get your foot in the door and keep that door open by growing those relationships at conferences.
Right. I think that's a misconception that a lot of new writers have. I know I did when I was a new writer. I was like, oh, well, I have to, I have to go to a writers conference. And then you go and you think there's so much pressure on that one because it's expensive. And you're like, I've got to get my monies back. I've got to do this. And this might be my only chance. And it doesn't work that way very often. The best thing is exactly what you did, Grace, to go to as many conferences as you can year after year to meet the same people, to develop relationships. And ultimately, that's what I ended up doing as well and that's how I got to know people. That's how I grew in my writing craft. And that's what happens. And after you've been going to conferences for 5, 6, 7 years, you know so many more people, and those connections and relationships are far more developed. And then when the time is right, God takes you, if he has publication in the path for you, he opens those doors and makes it happen. And all of a sudden you're like an overnight success after 7 years. You know?
A lot more than that. There are people who've been overnight successes after 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed this whole conversation. And we've got even better information and ideas for you about attending writers' conferences in the next podcast. So be sure to listen. Thanks for joining us today. You can find previous episodes and more resources at writefromthedeep.com.
And I bet you know someone who needs this podcast, so please share it with them.
So until next time,
embrace the deep.
Your writing and your life will never be the same.